Thank you so much for joining this first of hopefully what will be a yearly or biannual Hollywood Sobriety Summit. Very excited to have everybody here. We have people from the UK, we have people from, I think, Australia and all over the country and Chicago. This is just very exciting to have everybody here. So thank you so much for joining. I just want to start by saying, warm welcome to treatment professionals and counselors and peer support people who are just the rock stars of the treatment community, sober homes and RCOs, and the hundreds of people who've registered for the Recovery Movie Meetups program. A lot of our clients are here. And just news, we've got meetings up and running in the UK now, and we're starting in South Africa next month, and very excited how this is going, and Canada, of course. And we have students and faculty members from the University of Notre Dame and friends and colleagues. And so today we're going to be joined by Gabor Maté, who is the New York Times bestselling author of In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. The new book, The Myth of Normal, is going to be joining us briefly for a pre-taped interview. And we'll show in two parts. And also we're going to be joined by the Reverend Jan Brown, who's with us, with her lovely sash from Spirit Works Foundation, and Ted Mandel and Henri Venter of the University of Notre Dame, who have an innovative new course that is apparently extremely popular and really groundbreaking. Our topic today is really how popular entertainment, and especially movies, exert a powerful influence on people's decision-making when it comes to drugs and alcohol and other addictive behaviors over the span of a person's lifetime. And we're taking a lifetime approach to addiction in this conversation. And it's especially relevant when it comes to teen and young adults, which is why we're pleased to welcome members of the Association of Recovery Schools, the Association of Recovery and Higher Education, and the Association of Alternative Peer Group. Let me start by introducing the founder and executive director of Spirit Works, the Reverend Jan Brown. Jan, take it away.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Ted. Glad to be here with everyone. This project has become very exciting to me. Met Ted a few months ago, actually at the end of 2023, and quickly got connected. I myself am in recovery. I have been in recovery for 37 years, and so was able to find and sustain recovery when I was 22 years old. One of the things that we know is that, colleges and universities are what's called abstinence hostile environments. And so I certainly experienced that in my early college years, going back as an adult. In recovery made it very different. And so I was able to do what I needed to do. And it gives me a lot of gratitude to know that there are, as Ted mentioned, there are collegiate recovery programs, and young people are actually choosing what college or university they're going to attend by whether or not there's a collegiate recovery program there. So it just really shows how far we've come as a movement. And so one of the things that for me is very near and dear, I love my recovery and I love films. And so being able to bring the two together has just been a really awesome and wonderful experience. I've been involved in all kinds of other kind of movie projects and had to go that next step, if you will, because they didn't involve the recovery movement in the recovery field. And so just really grateful to you, Ted, for what you're doing and for the partnership and friendship and relationship that we've been able to establish. I thought I would talk a little bit about kind of the younger spectrum of those that we work with and those that we encounter through Spirit Works, and then offer, just some things to think about, as well as, some of the resources that are available that sometimes people just don't know about. So one of the things that we do is we offer a children and young people program, and it is designed around the National Association of Children of Addiction. We've been working with them for many, many years, and offer, right now we've been offering a camp. And these are children who are between 4th grade and 8th grade and are growing up with parental addiction. And so for them, it really isn't about, prevention, maybe preventing some of their use, but certainly not in all cases. But more and more, it's really about intervention, because they are growing up with this issue being already exposed to it. And what we do is we offer them the opportunity to come together and really to be together as a community and to learn that they're not alone, that there are more people kind of in the world who are struggling and living with these different kinds of conditions. And so they come together for a week, and we're actually going to be together for a winter session next week, and just giving them the opportunity to be with one another, to learn a little bit more about kind of the science of addiction and how it plays itself out, really helping them also recognize that they're at higher risk because of the families that they were born into and are growing up in. And so it's very near and dear work to me. When I got sober, one of my goals and missions and purpose in life is to make a positive difference in the life of a child. And so this is one of the ways that we are able to do that. We also more recently have begun, to even kind of dig a little bit lower and work with Sesame Street as an avenue and the work that they're doing around parental addiction. And they actually have a character named Carly who has grown up on the streets and has been in foster care, and now her mother is in recovery. And so, very age-appropriate language for Carly. Elmo and Elmo's dad, are talking about, and I often encourage adults to go and look, because sometimes we don't quite have the language to describe when we're talking with each other, and certainly with younger kids. So another kind of resource that if you don't know about, that I encourage you all to know about. Right now, they have and are going back and doing additional work, updating kind of their materials. Back when I started doing this work, it was really focused around alcohol use and alcoholism. Of late, it is far more about illicit drug use. And now even, overdose deaths and poisonings and things like that. Certainly, the mental health issues around suicide, we're seeing more and more, particularly coming out of COVID. And so the topics have changed. Sadly, the children have not. They're the same children and youth who are growing up with these even more difficult topics that they're facing. And so it's really good work. They are our future. They are, the loves of many of our lives, the children and youth. And so it's so important that we're paying attention to them and doing the work that we are doing. We spend a lot of time talking with kids and talking with young people and talking with, I do a good bit of work with Virginia Commonwealth University and their collegiate recovery program, and have had the good fortune of presenting at some of the conferences and things like that, and even talking to my staff who are much younger than I am about the influence of growing up with popular culture and some of the things that they're seeing these days that weren't necessarily issues when I was growing up. Just we were talking about the flag banners or something like that. They're probably laughing at me because I still haven't gotten it right. But we see signs for kratom and CBD and all of these other things. And as they're, we had a young person in the coalition, the Historic Triangle Drug Prevention Coalition. There's a youth committee, and they talk about going from home to school and the number of images that they see selling different products, and how confusing it is as to whether or not this is something we're supposed to be doing or not supposed to be doing. Of course, recognizing, as Ted is going to argue, the role of seeing all of these things. Many talk about the role of peers, right? So we all know that the role of peers and the role of family members, and its impact on first use, and certainly um, access is another huge thing with peers and family members. What they talk about and what we see is, the normalization when they're watching films and seeing some of these things, how much it's normalized, how much it's glamorized, how they then want to be like the folks that they're seeing in these different programs and the different celebrities in movies. And so that's one of the pieces that is pretty significant. I mean, we know that the earlier that someone begins to use, especially before 18 years old, the more likely, the more at risk they are for substance use as an adult. And kind of translated, what that means is that 9 out of 10 adults who have substance use disorder started before, experimented and started their use before they were 18. And 9 out of 10 is a pretty big number, if you ask me. So we know where it is. We know kind of what's happening, and so it's really important to find multiple ways to address it. And certainly film and popular entertainment is one of them. We were talking at our center in Williamsburg the other day about some of the programs that are out there, and I only had to watch the trailer for something called Euphoria, and it's something. There was, I guess, it's another one that we talked about, 13 Reasons Why, right? And we know that the teenage brain is at high risk because it's certainly still developing. We also know that that's the time where young people, all people, are looking at, well, gosh, what are my values? And really separating and trying to develop their own identity from their parents. And so, where are they looking to? And if you're seeing more and more, you're using your phone, you're watching film. That's my little one, by the way. That's Jackson. Hey, buddy. Oh, so those are all tremendous influences. I mean, 2 years ago, if you would ask me, how much I thought about some of these things, it has certainly changed when I have my own little one who is a big kids YouTube fan, right? And so he's already becoming very different when he gets to watch it versus when he doesn't get to watch it. And so, really being able to see what that effect is. To date, kind of the strategies that we use to begin, some of it is really about starting the conversation. We have a program called Hidden in Plain Sight, and it's a mock bedroom of a teenager, and it's got about 100 different items or props that could indicate risky behavior. And so, and there they are, right there in front of a person. And so we have, family members and professionals go through that bedroom just so that they can see, the kinds of things that might indicate, that their child is at risk or is participating in risky behavior. And so, and the hope of that is simply to allow people to start the conversation. Sadly, that's not always what we see, right? We see parents get pretty excited about seeing some of those things, and they're furiously taking notes, and it's like, don't go home and toss your child's bedroom. This really is about starting a conversation. But the number of those things, 90% of them we buy off the internet. We buy from Amazon or places like that. And so they do have a legitimate and good use in the hands of a bored, creative young person. They can also be put to a negative use. And so just really being able to raise the awareness of what's out there and what to be concerned about. And so, then hence my introduction to TED, and my love for films and my love for recovery, and being able to, start with the adult version, if you will, of recovery movie meetups. And it's been amazing. I mean, we sit around the center, we talk about, the different films that are in there. I'm really appreciative for some of the information about how it got to be, and the different actors, and those kinds of things, as well as, watching the films themselves. For years, one of the things that Spiritworks has done every year is we screen films and show them during conferences. And again, it really is about doing it in community, about having conversation about what we're seeing and hearing, the opportunity to express our feelings. And it's a pretty amazing time to be able to do this. And again, not having to translate it and be uncomfortable around being with people who don't get it, is also really important. So I have a tremendous amount of gratitude. We share, I was telling Ted as folks were coming on that we had an open house at one of our other centers last night, and bringing some of the workbooks up there, and the excitement that people have. And it can be done in all kinds of different ways. So I have the husband and wife couple who date night is Friday night, and he's in recovery. And so the two of them watch it and can have conversations in that way. And that's been pretty neat. And my again, expanded hope is as we are able to take, and we'll probably take them anyway, and certainly looking at age appropriate films for the teenagers and youth that we work with. And then we always have films at every camp. And so, to be able to have a film that might even more so be able to have them access some of their feelings and some of their lived experiences. I mean, one of the things that they talk about and that I read about is the importance of representation, and having people who look like you, having people who've had similar lived experiences as you, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to stop for now and pass it on to whoever's next. Just really glad to be here, and go from there.
Well, thank you, Jana. I'm going to put Spiritworks Foundation's website in the chat for anybody who wants to drop by and visit. And also, I will note, Jan, you are a nonprofit and open to taking donations. Hint, hint. So give generously. She's doing fantastic work. So let me, so following up on what Jan said, the effect of advertising, films, impressions, social media, entertainment, generally culture, can have some deleterious effects, some negative effects. I was just watching a movie, Emily the Criminal, the other day, which is a really interesting film. And there's a scene where she's at the bar with her friend, and she says, "I'm going to be good tonight." And then cut to, she's doing cocaine and drinking a lot in the bathroom, and guys are coming in and out, and it looks just like a lot of fun. And I remember that I used to have that kind of fun too. So, and if somebody else is watching that and being influenced by that, I mean, I can see how that is a compelling thing. But I think, but I've worked on the antidote to that, and that's based on my own experience. So I'm going to share I have a little deck that I'm going to share with you to sort of guide me through this. I'm going to share my sound as well.
Parents, our children are out of control. This is what happens when toilet humor is allowed to run rampant.
That's right. Kenny set himself on fire because he saw Terrence and Philip do it in that dirty movie.
We must stop dirty language from getting to our children's ears. We must go fight the source of it.
But what is the source?
Oh, that's easy. Times have changed. Our kids are getting worse. They won't obey their parents. They just want to fart and curse.
Should we blame the government or blame society?
Or should we blame the images on TV?
No, blame Canada! Blame Canada!
Okay, so, I noticed that our Canadian colleague, Stacey Peterson from Cedars Recovery, is here, so don't take it personally, Stacey. And the question is like, well, and when they're talking there, it was about foul language, but, for that, you could put in, substitute use of addictive substances and glamorization of alcohol and everything on screen. And so, the question is like, do we blame the images on TV or on the movie screens? Or, my point is like, why don't we try to leverage them? And, and this comes from actually like going through the experience myself. I mean, I had an alcohol addiction, which was pretty bad. And when I got sober, I had a lot of free time. A lot of you have heard this story, but I decided to do a personal dare where I would watch 100 movies about addiction and recovery in 100 days. And I did. And not all the movies were great, but a lot of the movies were really wonderful. And they really helped me see addiction in a whole new light. And they gave me a lot of the tools that I felt that I needed to reevaluate, where I was going with my life. And I thought that a lot of those messages could be shared with other people as a way to use films as an entry point to start a conversation about this important thing. And that was what became Addicted in Film, movies we love about the habits we hate. And people started using the book in groups and saying, we love it. Can you send us more copies? And I decided, well, why don't I turn this into a program that could be, scaled to introduce it into treatment centers and other recovery organizations, which is what Recovery Movie Meetups has begun. And we've started movies all over the country, now in Canada and the UK and soon South Africa. And we're starting one as far away as Nigeria and Romania and hopefully also Sweden. And then we just launched the movies, the teen and young adult movie guide to successful sobriety, which is the consumer-friendly version, more geared towards youth and adult. And my point in all of this is that, we walk around with this idea of like reality, of like our present state of mind, our reality. And when we're in a state of reality, we're deciding whether to use or not to use, or whether to go back to using, if we're having a conversation that's based around addictive behaviors. And that pertains to anybody who's challenged by these issues. And reality is not a thing. It's something which is created in the mind all the time and by each individual person. And reality is very much a product of the influences that are around certain people, including films and television shows and social factors as well. And then also people are constantly conducting thought experiments in their heads. And every day is a series of overlapping thought experiments. I mean, the fact that we're so successful as a species, cognitive abilities of the human being are based on our constant ability to foretell the future and then act on it or plan for it. And those thought experiments are great. They help us survive. Like, okay, there's going to be a tiger over there. I probably shouldn't go down that way. But in our modern world, we tend to then, that ability to forecast the future is turned into like the blessing, which is now a curse, because we're constantly doing thought experiments and ruminating about things. And ruminating about future use of drugs or alcohol is one of those things that happens. And so that really predicates and informs our decisions to use or not to use. And so, what is reality? Well, we're going to hear from Gabor Maté later that, this is a lot to do with like not just genetics, but also like our prenatal and early development environments, our sensory learning, textual learning, like what we can read, socialization, multimedia, obviously, that we talked about. And that creates like a present day reality. And then when you combine that with the power of memory, because memory is another huge component of what people think is their reality. And then you throw in these thought experiments, and then that creates the day-to-day decisions to avoid or to continue using or to quit using or to relapse if you've already are in recovery and are thinking of relapse. Not that everybody is, but those are the four things. You either avoid it, you continue using it, you quit it, or you relapse and start using again. Those are the four parameters of the person's like addiction and recovery life cycle. And what is that decision? Well, it's the present day moment of reality, plus the thought experiment, which is usually a cost-benefit analysis, like what's going to happen that's bad, what's going to happen that's good, and then you take an action, and then that action can have consequences, as we all know. And so, these thought experiments, these cost-benefit thought experiments that people are doing, how good are they? And here's the thing: when you're pre-first use phase, you haven't tried anything yet, you're just a teenager, you're hanging out. You don't have very good thought experiments to really do a cost-benefit analysis because you have no visual cues to go by. I mean, maybe you've seen some person who's unhoused on the street using a drug, and they look destitute. Maybe you've seen that. Maybe you've seen, some episodes of Intervention. Maybe you've seen something in a scare video or something that you saw in high school, whatever. But the truth of the matter is that you do not have a visual reference point yourself, because you haven't lived through anything. You're living in a state of sort of like innocence because you have no visuals to back up those negative consequences. So therefore, your thought experiments about the cost benefits of using at that first frat party are negligible. You haven't been to a frat party and been, date raped by somebody because you were too drunk or too high. You don't have that experience yet. Hopefully not. And hopefully you never will. And so you can't really create a thought experiment based around the negative influences that would have on you to guide better decision-making. And then maybe you're in the experimental phase, like you just started using drugs or alcohol, you're playing around, your fun is fun, you're hanging out with the great people as you're so popular, and your ego is stopping you from generating realistic thought experiments about the costs and benefits of things because you're so wrapped up in how much fun you're having. And then when you're in the regular use phase, let's say you're using heavily, you're partying a lot, you're in college, you're a young adult, whatever. And at that point, you're sort of riddled by cognitive distortions. You'll see an article on the web that says, casual drinking or 2 or 3 drinks a week or drinking wine is great and it's actually good for your health. Of course, your cognitive distortions and biases will have you focus on how great casual drinking and moderate drinking is. And you'll totally discard all the evidence that says that drinking anything is probably horribly bad and that you could become addicted. So people select what they want to hear when they're in the sort of regular use phase. Then you're in the abuse phase. And at that point, outright denial kicks in. You crashed your car, but you know what? Even though you're having a thought experiment, remembering you crashing your car, you discount that visual and you put it out of your mind. You try to forget it. So you're in a state of denial in a sense. So your thought experiments are basically hampered by your own inability to really see the consequences or having erased them or just ignoring the ones that you've already experienced. And then you're in the consequences phase. And then you go to a commitment to quit phase. So which is where you're like, okay, I need to do something. And then at that point, you have some experiential visuals to guide you because you're like, what happened. You went to court for your DUI. You've seen the look on your wife's face when you tell her that, you're not going to be able to take the kids because you have to go to read. I mean, all those things that are visually appealing and visually compelling to inform your thought experiments about whether you want to continue rehab or stop rehab or continue using or quit forever or whatever. And then you're in the treatment phase. And then you're in a period where visuals are very dialectical. And I'll explain a little bit more by what I mean about that. But in the treatment phase, you're looking at all sides of the addiction and recovery conversation, not just the good, but the bad. And you're also evaluating the fact that there were some good aspects to when you were using. And you also want to sort of like decouple that from the problems that you had and how to rewire your brain and your behaviors based on understanding that it's unacceptable to be focusing on all the great things you used to do. As we know, a lot of people who just first go to rehab, they miss their friends, they miss partying. And when they're out of rehab, they feel like, their life is over. They can't have fun anymore. And so that the dialectical approach to looking at those pros and cons is something that's very important in the recovery setting. And it's something that's important in the sense that, like, at the beginning, for teenagers especially, drugs are bad, scare you. But, there's another part of that conversation, which is, maybe you might end up being a moderate drinker or somebody who could enjoy an alcoholic beverage from time to time and enjoy that with friends like 90% of the country and the world, or maybe not. I mean, so, and then in the post-treatment phase, you have affirmative visuals, which is where, visuals that sort of that underscore the commitment that you made and how good it is. You have visuals of people hugging each other. You have visuals of people hugging you. You have visuals of you reconciling with your partner. You have visuals of your children running up to you after your stint in rehab saying, "Daddy, we missed you. We want you back." All those things are affirmative visuals. And what I'm arguing is that if you can't get those visuals in real life or they're not working for you, then that's where movies come in. Because the movies are sort of they're just elaborate visualizations. They're thought experiments. So you can visualize the consequences without having to live them. You can identify with characters that are just like you. You can understand addiction dialectically, that you can understand that, yes, there were some benefits to using, but they're definitely outweighed by the negative consequences of using. And you want to see that in a movie played out in the form of a drama, which is compelling and allows you to understand that, hey, it's not just a one-sided conversation. And then it allows you to also own up to the recovery process. A lot of movies show you exactly what recovery could be, what rehab is, and how a large part of that is to buy in and own up to the process, to know that you're not there just to check a box and then do your 30 days and get out and go back to the same thing. This is an opportunity for you to really heal yourself. And movies definitely help you that. I'll give you some examples. And then it's also a way to understand and empathize with loved ones. I mean, remember, it's not just a one-sided conversation. You've affected the lives of other people, potentially very harmfully. And it's very important for you to be able to see the side of another person. And it's not always easy to do that. You can't always expect to go to somebody whose feelings you hurt or a marriage you destroyed and say, hey, you know what? I finally see your side of the story and I'm here to help and you will forgive me. Well, no, it doesn't necessarily work like that. Some people will never forgive you. And the ability to see and empathize with all points of view from loved ones, parents, children, sisters, brothers, spouses, that plays out in movies in a very compelling format. And also, let's realize it's not all about you. And that's just something that's very important to acknowledge, that you are hurting other people and you want to see what life is like for them dealing with you. And it's very important to show that perspective. And you're not going to get that outside of a movie unless somebody tells you a story about how they were dealing with someone. And the Smart Recovery has a friends and family program, and a lot of Al-Anon meetings have that format, but it's all verbal. It's not visual. And so movies give you a way to see the other side of the story and another person's perspective of your use behavior. And then you can also, the best part is, like, you can scare people, you can inspire them, but the best way to get people really to use visuals is to have them be inspired by heroic endings. And addiction recovery specifically is intended to have a heroic ending. And that's what we're all in the business of doing. That's my product. That's Jan's product. That's a lot of your products, is successful heroic endings to a story, and it follows a 3-act structure. You have a person who has a problem, they undergo a radical transformation, they go against an antagonist, the Darth Vader of their own life, which is their addiction, and they blow up the Death Star and they come out the other side and they heal the universe. That's really the story of addiction, is the story that's been told in every movie ever made. So the parallel in terms of allegorically is really profound. And then also, it's very important to note that understand that addiction, the recovery is not a given. It doesn't always work, and there's things to learn from that. So let's visualize the consequences. One of the first movies that I watch over and over again, I watch it every month, is The Lost Weekend with Ray Milland. And that's a story about this is the first time that anybody ever saw anything about somebody who was, quote, alcoholic. This is when AA had first started. Nobody had even used the term before. And to see a big name actor like Ray Milland tell such a tragic tale, where he goes through delirium tremens, where he blows up all his relationships, where he's walking around carrying a typewriter. He's a writer. And this is the only thing that will help him write a book, which is the only thing that will get him out of this quagmire. And he's ready to pawn it all so he can get a fifth of Jack. I mean, that is a compelling way to look at alcohol addiction. And then Train Spotting as well. I mean, you visualize like these kids having fun, but you also, in this film, if you've seen it, there is a harrowing depiction of withdrawal from heroin that if the right people saw it in the right context, you would never want to touch heroin as long as you live if you think that this is what you'd be putting yourself into. And then also, and this movie, A Requiem for a Dream, is not included in our teen and young adults program because it's actually a little bit, it's a difficult pill to swallow. But Requiem for a Dream, if you've seen it, you know that this movie is about as flagrantly scary and consequential about use and abuse of heroin, etc., as has ever been made. And so that is, a way to visualize consequences. And for somebody who has a young daughter, who might at some point get addicted to drugs and have to prostitute themselves in order to buy drugs, which is a possibility. You are not going to visualize those consequences until you've actually lived them. Now, what if you see this movie and have those visualize those consequences through the character of the young girl in this film? And if you see that before you take heroin for the first time, that might be the moment where you decide to never touch heroin. And, hopefully that is the end result of a movie this powerful, is just that. Let's identify with the characters. Like, what's great about this is that, a young kid might be able to understand Ben is back if they just got out of rehab and they understand some of the frustrations of having to deal with, like, the fact that, like, you're dealing with your parents again, you're out of rehab, nobody trusts you. Do you trust yourself? Beautiful Boy is another one where, if you're a young person, you identify with the character of Timothée Chalamet, who, like, just after being on meth for so long realizes or says or feels that life is just not interesting enough for him. And yet he has so much to live for: college education, paid for, successful father, wonderful family, and yet it's just not enough. And that's a compelling thing to talk about with young children. The film Cherry on Apple TV is also excellent. How, PTSD factors into identification. People who've suffered past trauma, etc., get into drugs and alcohol. And a movie that I think is really charming, which is called Smashed, which is about young adults who are drinking casually until they're not. And that is another film where you can identify with characters, especially if you're a young adult or a young married couple, or in a relationship like I was for years with women that I would carefully select to match my drinking patterns. And, how did that go for you, Ted? Obviously not too well. And then understand addiction dialectically, the good, the bad. And so Flight, posits a very interesting question. Like, he saves 300 people when he's drunk. Is it possible that maybe being slightly drunk is actually a good thing? Can people do miraculous things when they're altered? Is that what drug and alcohol use is a quest for a deeper ability, a higher ability? Obviously not, but it's interesting to have that conversation and to dispel the idea that no, that was an outlier. That was just a fluke. You are not better at anything when you're high. And there's other movies about, like the famous writers and authors, Hemingway, etc. Everybody thought, they were better authors because they were drunkards. That's not true. They never wrote a word of prose when they were drinking. It's only after they finished a book and then they started drinking to maybe celebrate what they had done or the ennui of life, whatever. And in The Good House, you have somebody, Sigourney Weaver, who's also, by the way, a big supporter of our program and says hello to everybody and good luck in your recovery. In The Good House, she is in a scene where she starts drinking a lot. Nobody knows. And they say, gosh, Hildy, you're so wonderful. You're so great and so loving. And she internalizes this to feel that, you know what? If I could just keep my drinking under control and drink 3 to 4 drinks, everybody would love me again. And I'd be the best mom ever. And, that really speaks a lot to what's going on with the whole, wine o'clock, mommy wine and mommy juice thing that's going on with a lot of women that happened, primarily during the pandemic. And then you've got a movie called Another Round, which won the best film last year for Best Picture, which is where, like, these guys in a Danish high school decide that their lives is really boring and they decide to undergo an experiment where they're going to try to stay at a 0.08 alcohol level all day long to see what happens. And voila, their life turns really great. Like, they start being better teachers, their kids are better students, they get better test scores. Is it possible that maybe being slightly altered, slightly drunk is a good thing? Well, the answer to that question dialectically is answered. And so, for instance, the whole idea that something is better when high, which is one of the things that comes up. This is a billboard right outside my house that says "shot while high on Kurvana." So the cannabis industry has stole the iPhone's campaign that said, this is what a beautiful photo will look like if you use the iPhone. Their point is that you'll take better photos and be more artistic if you're high on cannabis. Think about that. That's their marketing campaign. And then another one, like back to the whole idea of staying. Oh wait, what if this is a thought experiment? What if there were a pill each morning, 24 hours of effective use? You stay at a 0.05 back all day long without ever needing to drink. If you drink more, it's not going to do anything. If you drink less, it's not going to do anything. If you don't drink at all, it doesn't matter. You'll stay at that blood alcohol level, guaranteed, all day long. How many people would take that drug to be slightly buzzed all day? That's a good question. And to have that conversation with a teen, young adult, or somebody in recovery, I did a survey to see who would take this drug. Who wants to guess, what the percentage was? 85% of people would not take it, just FYI. And then, movies where you own up to the recovery process. 28 Days shows Sandra Bullock phoning it in, checking a box, not really being intrigued by this, and then realizing that, hey, you know what? I've got a problem, and owning up to it. Clean and Sober, also a very important film. Thanks for Sharing, also important film about the fellowship. And showing these movies that show the process of recovery in a favorable light is very compelling. It invites people to view recovery, therapeutic recovery and facility-based recovery as a good thing and not be not an antagonistic force, and to also recognize that when they're doing that work, that they should actually be doing the work as opposed to be phoning it in. And then understand and empathize the other side. 4 Good Days with Glenn Close. Like, you see what a mother's going through when her daughter's been through rehab 11 times and she's at your doorstep asking for money to buy heroin again after she's robbed you blind. Do you do it? Do you let her in your house, even though she's freezing on your doorstep? Do you call the police? These are all things that, are interesting to view from the safety of a movie. And Ben is back as well. You see what Julia Roberts goes through with her marriage to another person, with her stepfather, and what she's doing, and how her whole family's being disrupted by Ben being back. And also, Beautiful Boy, the perspective of Steve Carell in that film is quite compelling, because the movie's not just about Timothy, it's about Stephen Carell dealing with and trying to understand his own son, and not understanding who the hell his son is. And then realizing it's not all about you. You're in a relationship with somebody who has alcohol use, or you both drank and now you don't. Days of Wine and Roses, fantastic film. What happens when one of your spouses goes to rehab and gets better and then comes back and they're different? That's examined in the movie When a Man Loves a Woman. But what about the fact that you blew things so badly and now you want to come back to your family and you think that everyone's going to forgive you, or you don't know how to atone for what you did when you were drunk or high? That's beautifully examined in the movie Rachel Getting Married. And I think a very powerful film for any young woman who's in recovery to view, because it has so many amazing lessons. And of course, we can be inspired by heroic endings. Denzel Washington admits at the end of Flight that he's was using, and he gets convicted and goes to jail. But that's a win for him, because it's the first time in his whole life he's actually been honest about what he's doing. And that opens up the possibility and the opportunity for him to reconcile with his son for the first time in his life. And Crazy Heart, where this guy's been drinking and it almost kills him, and he's a washed up country music star. And by the end of the movie, even though in the book he has a heart attack, but in the movie there's a happy ending where he gets a contract, he gets his life back together, gets the girl, or no, he doesn't get the girl, but his whole career is resurgent, which is a wonderful counterpoint to this whole alcohol-soaked culture and myth of country music, which is seen by most people as having everything to do with alcohol use and being drunk. The major liquor sponsors, the people who, and the fact that 80% of country music songs have something to do with drinking or losing the girl or being drunk. I mean, that's a true proven fact. It's actually in the book that I wrote. And then Recovery's How to Give It, and Leaving Las Vegas, sorry, spoiler alert, he dies at the end, but that's what he wanted to do anyway. There was no way to save him. He wanted to commit slow suicide. Oh, guys, we're having a tremor in LA, just FYI. Okay, cool. So LA, right? And then in A Star Is Born, sadly, the country music star in this film also ends up committing suicide at the end. And Gia, Angelina Jolie, no matter how much treatment she tried and whatever she did, she just kept relapsing on heroin, and tragically she died. And and this also shows us that we're not immune from these kinds of things if we're famous. In fact, quite the opposite. So again, movies can help create awesome thought experiments without the risks of actually living those things, or the emotional damage that you would incur if you actually had to live those things yourself. And so that leads to vicarious learning. And so you see characters making rational choices and getting better results. You see characters feeling shame, but you're not forced to feel that yourself, because feeling shame can be a trigger to relapse. And then you see characters suffering pain, but you're not forced to experience it. And feeling more pain is another reason to relapse, because you're using drugs and alcohol to overcome that pain to begin with, right? And then you see the other side, other people's perspective. You see movies that help explore addiction dialectically, which is important because you can see that, there are two sides, and characters being inspired and heroic outcomes that most people would like to emulate. And so, again, movie-assisted recovery movie meetups is you observe something in the objective experience of watching a movie. You evaluate it subjectively and objectively, either individually through the book when you're using it or watching it at home, or in a group setting through recovery movie meetups. And then it's reinforced as a subjective aha decision that you make in your own mind to, like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm going to quit, or I'm going to stay sober. And that is a new reality based on better decisions. That's really the product that I work with, and the currency that I deal with. So I'm going to turn it over to our illustrious professors from the University of Notre Dame. Ted Mandel and Andre Venter have created these phenomenally innovative. It's right up my alley. My book was called Addicted and Filled. Their course is called, I'm going to get this wrong, Drunk on Film. And so I'm really so pleased to have them here. They're doing amazing work. We're thinking about, ways to expand this, and they have a curriculum. And so any of you from collegiate scenes or recovery schools, you're probably going to want to pay attention, and I'll have all the contact information for Ted and Andre. Ted, go ahead and take it away, and I'm going to let you share your screen.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Ted. I'm Fighting Irish Ted, Notre Dame Ted, something like that. We have two Teds. And Andre Venter, my colleague over in the Department of Psychology. I don't know, Andre, if you want to say hi to everybody before we get started. This has been a bit of a journey in the last 20 minutes. I bounced between three computers. Thankfully, I'm in an educational environment where I have a great IT person in Dave Clower to help out. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully this will work. So Drunk on Film, the Psychology of Storytelling with Alcohol and its Effect on Alcohol Consumption, is an undergraduate course that Andre and I started in the spring of 2020. We are currently in our 14th semester teaching this class. We teach it to undergraduates. We've probably taught over 1,200 students over the course of that time. And the idea is that the course is set up to examine the impact that the media has on student alcohol use and abuse. I have three children. One's graduated from Notre Dame, one is currently a senior, another one's at the University of Dayton. And what I recognize for many years, this is my 36th year at Notre Dame, is that there's a amazingly, I don't know how to explain it, Andre, culture of drinking, of binge drinking on college campuses. It's not just Notre Dame, it's universal across the nation. The idea that somehow when you get to college, that drinking alcohol and binge drinking is a way to be part of the community. Why is that? Why are students drawn into this culture and actually drinking essentially the way someone who is addicted to alcohol would be if they weren't in college? And why isn't that recognized? What are the influences? So we started this class, and the class itself looks at a number of media. We look at feature films, documentaries, social media, advertisements, and we try to dissect the role of alcohol in the narrative. And it's interesting, Ted, you showed those 8 phases. As I was looking at the 8 phases, I noticed a progression, a very similar progression that we follow in our films, but for a different reason and a different audience. And I think it's interesting, some of our films will overlap that you just talked about, but we look at them through the eyes of a 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old student rather than through the eyes of someone who's in recovery or in the addiction process. It's kind of interesting how we can use the same film and talk about different things. We'll start with these younger protagonist films like The Kissing Booth and Edge of 17, which are clearly targeted at junior high girls and junior high, these kind of rom-coms. Then our protagonists will get older. Like we'll look at some films about college students. We show Animal House. And then we go to older protagonists like Amy Schumer in Trainwreck. But a lot of these films celebrate binge drinking. Why do students drink as much as they do? Well, maybe it's because that's what all they've seen growing up. That's the narrative. That's what you do in high school. That's what you do in college. That's how you gain friends. That's how you have boyfriends, girlfriends, romance, sex. It's all usually attached to alcohol. We also balance that by looking at those narratives, kind of examining these narratives. A lot of these students have seen films like The Kissing Booth, but in many cases, we'll ask them, when did you see that? Oh, yeah, I saw that in when I was in 8th grade or 9th grade. I don't ever remember any drinking in it until we start to point out, oh, yeah. So I mean, a lot of this is in some way, a subconscious level because we're so saturated with it in our culture. We balance these narratives with nonfiction films, documentaries about the realities of binge drinking, about the realities of social media use and what addiction can be at that level, about the realities of advertising and how advertising sells you the product of alcohol. And also about, go ahead, Andre.
Could I just jump in here? I want to just take a step back for a moment. When you said much of this is subconscious, right? And they don't remember. And I just want to make a point. If you look at the research on subliminal priming, if you look at the research that shows very clearly that people can be exposed to stimuli that they're not consciously aware of seeing, right? And subliminal priming primes people with images very, very fast. So fast you don't register it. But the research is very clear that those things still shape what we like. So the fact that students don't remember seeing these things does not mean that it isn't shaping their behaviors, their choices. Subliminal priming, why do ads run over and 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 over again, right? Research shows people only pay attention to 8% of the information consciously, but the other 92% is hitting them, and it's shaping what they do. Sorry, Ted.
Oh, no. This is how our class goes for 2.5 hours every day.
It's pretty much like that.
And then finally, a documentary like The Hunting Ground, which is directly the audience is targeting is the college students themselves. And this is about sexual assaults on college campuses. So what we'll do is we'll take a film like The Hunting Ground and the realities of that culture, and we'll compare it to a similar scene that's in a fictional film. And I'll show you how we do that in a minute, but I wanted to get through a little bit more of the overview of our class. Let's go to the next. There we go. Sorry. In addition to the films, we sprinkle in about a dozen or so TED Talks. TED Talks on the psychology of addiction, Johann Hari, about vulnerability, Brené Brown, but also about the process of storytelling. And storytelling, and Andre, you can jump in here right now, is a major factor in the college culture. Something that I didn't even think about when I started this class is how much the process of telling a story redefines what drinking is in college.
But the fact is, storytelling is a ubiquitous human phenomenon, and I think is in a sense something we're immersed in. We make sense through storytelling. We make sense, and I can do this. If you look at Dan McAdams' work on narrative identity and the way we can think about ourselves and how our self or our sense of who we are is the narrative, a story that we tell that makes sense of who we are based upon where we've come from, based upon where we think we're going. It integrates this autobiographic memory with a vision for the future, making sense of who we currently are, right? And, Ted used the word culture. Cultures are meaning systems. They're stories, they're narratives that make sense of our existence, right? And in many ways, we are fundamentally storytelling beings, and the stories we tell ourselves create a narrative truth. So the interesting thing about the stories, I've been at Ted's been here 36 years. I think I've been here 33 years. And at Notre Dame, a very big thing are reunion weekends when students graduates come back 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, and they come back and they relive the stories from their undergrad years. And the truth is, the stories they're telling 5, 10, 15 years later aren't the events as they unfolded originally. They are now narrative truths that have developed and shaped. And the point that Ted's making here is the debriefs and the stories that students tell the morning after is actually more important to them in some ways than the night before. That they are creating meaning, they are bonding, they are forming an identity, they are fulfilling their sense of belonging. Sunday mornings, Saturday mornings, telling stories about the nights before.
Right. And we try to get them to see that it's the story that makes that quote unquote memory that they're trying to make good memories. They'll say, we went out and party, had fun, had good memories. It's not what actually happened. It's the story that they tell about what happened. And the question is, how are you telling the story? Are you telling it for comedic effect? Most of the 90% of the time it is. And is that really what happens? Are you changing an event that was very potentially dangerous into something that's comedic for entertainment value? And we see how films do that, and we compare that to real life. We also, go ahead, sorry.
I could just jump in again. And again, so Dan McAdams talks about what he calls redemptive narratives. And if you just go back to the previous overhead real quick, Ted, sorry. That the magic of storytelling, the Donald Davis TED Talk. That's the Donald Davis one.
No, that's a different one. How the story changes the teller. Yeah.
Right. So Donald Davis is a remarkable. I think he's trained as a clinician, but he works with stories and the way in which, when we've experienced trauma or suffering in our lives, the idea that the way you narrate that event and make sense of it post hoc never will take the trauma or the suffering away, but it'll change your relationship with that, right? So the way in which people make sense of the things that happened to them, and redeem traumatic experiences. Again, when Ted talks about Saturday or Sunday morning storytelling, when something bad happens, and again, how these kids can make sense of it and turn it into something that is different from what it was, and develop an identity and a sense of meaning about the event that doesn't really reflect what really happened.
Mm-hmm. As far as redemptive narratives, we use the book "Quit Like a Woman" by Holly Whitaker. It's a New York Times bestseller. And it's a first-person narrative. And what we found in students is that, and we've chosen films where it's a very first-person. I mean, film in general, a lot of films it's told from a first-person perspective, the protagonist. So we're trying to get the students at some point in time in this semester to identify with a character and say, you know what, that character, that was me in high school, or that character, that's my mom, or that's my uncle, or that's my roommate. I can see that character. So each one of these films as we go is a slightly different narrative where the protagonist is relationship to alcohol. And Holly Whitaker's writing is so raw and genuine. They really identify this, and we actually use this as a model for them to tell their own stories. So by the end of the semester, they have to write a paper, and they have to tell their own narrative, tell their own story, and essentially in the way that Holly does in her book. Yeah, I forget.
Something that Hollywood Ted said earlier on in his talk, and this idea of why use movies and why tell stories, and I would kind of disagree with something that he said in there, in that you can watch these things and not feel the shame. I think when you watch and you become empathic, and that's the thing about movies and stories. Students tell us this: the data, the statistics about cancer, the statistics about how dangerous it is, has no effect on them. What has an effect to them is the stories they hear, because they can empathize. They actually do feel something, and I think this ability to watch a movie, see a character suffer, and in some ways suffer with them, is why they work so well. I think there has to be some connection there, right? And I think that's the difference between stories and statistics. Statistics are just there, they're straightforward. The story draws you in. It pulls you into it. And I think that's a really important part of movies.
And stories are the element of advertising and commercials. So Sunday, there's going to be some great stories during the television timeouts to the Super Bowl. But what is the story of alcohol that's been sold to us and sold to these students since they were young? Well, we kind of cover three different areas of that. Number one is community. The idea that drinking brings you together. We do it socially. It brings us all together. It's a way of connecting with people. This is actually a still frame from an ad that's been running through the NFL, and the text is right there. People are good for you. It's an ad for Jim Beam. It ends up being, is Jim Beam bringing people together? No, but that's what the suggestion is.
But and what ads like this do is they produce positive emotions, and you watch it and you feel good, right? And then you associate, ultimately, when the ad ends, you're left with this picture, and you associate that positive feeling with this product.
Right. And that's actually carried over to, even if you see we go back even to Disney films. We'll ask our students in their first reflection, tell us, write about the experience of the first film that you remember watching that had alcohol involved with it. What was it like? What was the experience like? Who did you watch it with? And what was the narrative of alcohol? Well, this is actually a still frame from Tangled, the Disney film. And as you can see, this is, I got a dream, I got a dream. Anyway, this is that song. But in the midst of the song, everybody's raising up their beer stein, and it's a community of drinkers who are celebrating this musical. Most people don't even recognize that. Beauty and the Beast is another film. It's a narrative that plays shockingly in a Disney film. The second aspect of it is just the sense that alcohol reduces anxiety, it relaxes you, which it initially does, but as we all know, it increases your anxiety on the back end, and it causes more problems from an anxiety level. And most students have no clue in that. That totally blows them away. Wait, you mean this thing that I work hard, play hard motto that I've been going with? I need to relax on the weekend because I've been studying so hard. This is actually making me more anxious. But let's look at how it's even advertised. I mean, Coors uses the word chill. You've seen the Corona ads with him on the beach. Obviously, relaxation is a part of the narrative of alcohol advertising. And you see it in films. We show a film, Charlize Theron's young adult, where she drinks to relax on a blind date before she ends up having a one-night stand with this guy. But there's a direct connection between drinking and sex. And you'll see that over and over and over again in narratives. And that's another connection that students seem to be feeling like, I cannot speak to somebody, go to a party, have a relationship unless I have a drink, a shot, do something, pre-game.
Making them realize that vulnerability, that, I was walking across campus years ago and I heard some students talking, and the one girl was telling the guys that she had drunk texted a guy she liked the night before and it didn't go well. But the way she dealt with the embarrassment, she said, oh, well, drunk me did it. I don't have to feel bad about that, right? So this idea that they think they can lower their inhibitions, be vulnerable when they're drunk, and they mistake that for real vulnerability, right? Where you don't have an easy out in terms of having alcohol to fall back on. So for them, drinking and hooking up, there's a direct connection between those. They believe they're becoming more vulnerable, and that's actually not at all the case.
Right. And, drinking and hooking up is a big theme that we have in this class and in the middle portion of the class. But the objectification of women is also something that's long been a part of advertising and alcohol and cigarette smoking, actually beyond that, right? The idea that, connecting sexual images of women and objectifying the body with a alcohol product is something that inherently most students, again, you would think that would be something they're aware of, but they're not aware of. A lot of that kind of advertising actually predates them a little bit in the 2000s. And now with social media, the alcohol companies have changed a little bit their targeting and how they target audience with influencers. But this actually, what I'm showing you right now, is something called the Beer Poster Challenge. It was a year or two ago on TikTok and Instagram. And the idea was that women actually create their own beer posters. This is not actually an ad by Michelob. This is an Instagram post by this woman who put herself and photoshopped herself into this poster as part of a trend that's on social media. Essentially, they're doing all the advertising for the alcohol company. But the objectification of women is something that we also see in these rom-coms and that are targeted at younger audiences. So I want to walk you through real quickly the kissing booth. This is a scene. I'm not going to show the scene. I'll just show you some still frames. But they're trying to give you the narrative of how this plays out and how kind of dangerous it is when you compare it to the reality of this particular situation if it would happen in real life. So the kissing booth, I don't know if you guys have seen this film. I hope you haven't. It's kind of terrible, but it was the most watched film on Netflix in 2018. It spawned 2 sequels, and most of our students have heard it, and at least 50% of them had seen it before coming into class. This is Joey King, who plays Elle Evans, the kind of quote-unquote plain Jane junior in high school, who's now going out to her first party of the night, of the school season. And you can see what she's wearing. She's making sure she looks good. She shows up at this party, and like most rom-coms and most films targeted at teenagers, the first images of a party tend to be hookups connected with alcohol. This is literally the first frame of this party, where this couple is on the ground with a red cup and an empty beer bottle. And then the camera cranes up to this ridiculously nice mansion that apparently has no parents involved. They're gone. And that's also another thing. The parents seem to disappear. And in many cases are killed off before they're killed off before the narrative even starts in this film. So they show up, and here's Elle and the 3 OMG girls who welcome her to her first party and offer her a shot. Not necessarily any shot, a green shot, a nice bright green shot. Elle says, "I don't drink." And that's the sober, straight student is considered the outsider. So our generation has been raised to understand that if you're sober and straight, you're not part of the social community. And this even continues now in college. We have so many students who've talked about the alienation they have by being the student who's not drinking at the party, or the student, they feel like they're just not part of the community. To be part of the community, you have to drink. And that's, of course, what Elle does. And she takes the drink, and it's not the last one she takes. Now, they offer her a pink one. It tastes like pink, they say. So there she goes. Now she becomes part of the community. And when she does this launches, and you'll see this in many films, a music video montage. The idea of binge drinking that brings you into social connection with all of your classmates, and it's done at a very rapid pace, so you cannot tell how much she's actually drank. So that's actually half a picture of the shots now that she has. And there's time compression, so you don't know how much she's had, you don't know how long she's had it. But unfortunately, she ends up standing up, getting drunk, and taking her clothes off. And this is where we get back to this objectification of the female body that we see it a lot in these teen romances. Of course, she ends up drunk and dizzy, and this mysterious figure picks her up and carries her away. Now, it's most of us would look at this and go, this is a pretty dangerous situation for any high school student to be in. Never drank before. In reality, if she would have had 2 or 3 drinks, she would have been blacked out far before this part of the scene. But this is literally a 30-second sequence that gets her from taking her first shot to blacking out drunk. She wakes up the next morning in a bed. Whose bed? She doesn't know. The music is a bit horror-like, but it's a bit comical, as if it's lighthearted, but suspenseful. And it's, of course, Jacob Elordi, the hunk that hosted Saturday Night Live a couple weeks ago. But he shows up, and of course, he is what we call the sober knight. The guy at the party, despite the fact that he's a complete jerk the rest of the film, seems to be sober. Everybody else is drinking, but this guy is sober enough and carries her off to this bedroom where he doesn't do anything other than make sure she goes to sleep. And of course, he is her crush. So she gets up, she makes a fool of herself, she pulls down the curtain, they end up on the floor, rolling around. She can't believe it. It's the first time she's been close to her crush, and she's embarrassed. She doesn't know what to do. He kind of laughs at her, and where does this end? Ted, you mentioned consequences. The consequences, 2 scenes later, she ends up sleeping with him under the Hollywood sign. Of course, that always happens. But by essentially binge drinking, she's rewarded by getting the crush that she's actually been seeking throughout the film. It's a really dangerous narrative. Most students don't actually think about it, but then when we talk about it and have discussions in class and compare that to their own experiences, that's when we start to make some progress with our students. When we talk about experiences, there's a great research article, and Andre, I don't know if you want to jump in here on research articles, but one of them is called The Alcohol and the Constitution of Friendship. And that is a big part of students' drinking habits, is that this is not just me drinking. It's a communal thing. As Holly Whitaker says, I didn't like drinking. I didn't drink. We drank. It's a communal thing.
And it's communal to the degree that you have to keep up with your friends. You drink to the same level and you stay at the same level, right? So students talk about the fact if they go to a party, and people offer them a drink, if they don't take a drink, there's social pressure. People try and pressure them to drink. And then if you come in late, they want you to drink fast so you can catch up, so you can get to the same level. So there's a real sense of we're in this together and we're going to do it together to the same degree. And you keep up with your friends.
And by doing it together, that means when you're essentially poisoning yourself with alcohol and puking out your guts, there's the girl who's going to pull your hair back and hold it back. And somehow that's a part of friendship. And they're not really thinking, they're thinking more of like, that's how I made friends, rather than the dangerous aspects of the binge drink.
And I mean, we're asking for photographs in their final papers, and I can't tell you how many final papers come in with photographs of the students of themselves in that position. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, it is. But then, to get to Ted's point, then I think this is the turning point in the class, is we start to show narratives of protagonists who have addiction problems. We use them in different ways. We use Mary Goes Round as a comparison. We can contrast that story. This is a small independent film that played the Toronto Film Festival.
Has a much more realistic view of recovery compared to Trainwreck.
Yeah, so Mary is a recovery counselor who actually has an addiction problem. We compare that to Amy Schumer and Trainwreck, and the narratives are very similar, but one's clearly more reality-based. Flight, actually, Ted, you use it. We use it as a way of talking about high-functioning alcoholics. Obviously, we don't have any students who are flying planes upside down, but we do have a lot of students who are performing some academic miracles, given the fact that they drink as much as they do. Are they high-functioning alcoholics, or are they actually living a life that once they graduate on May 17th would be considered that? Because we hear over and over again, Andre, right? You can't be an alcoholic in college.
And to give you a sense of how much they drink, 15 drinks on a night is not considered extreme.
Right. That was shocking to us. And then other protagonists who have addiction problems, Ben Affleck in The Way Back. And then this really great film that I can't recommend more, Acretia, which is about a mother who's has an alcohol use disorder, comes back on a Thanksgiving weekend, and
it's not a feel-good movie.
No, it's not a feel-good movie, but it's the one film that the students who've grown up in with parents who have addictions or family members, they point to that film as the one film that actually
tells their story. Tells it story.
And again, we look at some similar films, Smashed, Manchester by the Sea, and When a Man Loves a Woman, but in a slightly different take on these films. We're looking at the relationships that are caused, how, it's not just about the person who's drinking, it's about how this person's relationship with their husband, loved one, how it's affected, how it's not just alcohol doesn't just affect the person who's drinking, it affects a lot of people. And even those people on campus who do not drink, they are being affected by alcohol, and they will be affected by alcohol later on in life. Then we end by the way, all the way along the lines, the students are writing stories or writing reflections about this, comparing their own personal experiences with the narratives that they see in the films. We end the semester with a video of what kintsugi is. I'll let Andre explain that. But basically, we get a lot of back-end comments at the end of this semester about how going through this process, watching films, watching the media, and comparing alcohol, the fictional accounts of alcohol with their own, has really changed their behavior and changed their thoughts. This is just one sample of literally dozens or hundreds that we get. This class is forever, and I mean forever, changed my life. And I think a lot of it has to do with what they learn from each other through discussion, not necessarily just what we present. But Andre, do you want to talk about kintsugi?
Look, I do think this idea of them, we've had students in class who talk about being in recovery, being in AA. We have students who've talked about their sexual assault experiences. And again, I do think Ted and I, and Ted maybe more than I, are nothing more than the conduits through which this unfolds, but they learn a lot from each other. But kintsugi is this Japanese tradition of repairing broken pottery. That's, I think, pretty much where it started. And they use it. It's a very beautiful, slow, painstaking process. And the little video we use is quite beautiful. And the guy talks at the end about repairing our own fault, our own wounds, our own brokenness in some senses, right? Look, our students, I think a lot of universities like Notre Dame, we draw students who are perfectionistic, who are driven, who are competitive, who've had to be the best their whole lives long, and nobody can live up to that, and nobody is that all the time. And these kids struggle. They're fragile. They are at times broken. And I think this little video at the end talks to them about self-acceptance, accepting it. Again, Ed, early on in the class, we talked about wounds in movies and storytelling, right? That stories are about wounds, right? And we all have wounds and carry wounds. And this idea of acknowledging it and accepting it, and I think accepting it in yourself, and then working to heal that. And I think that is a really, very powerful effect on the students at the end.
Real quickly, because I know we're running out of time, we do give surveys. We have surveys and in-class polls. Surveys like this, we ask them when they drank their alcohol for the first time. We find that roughly, I don't know what the number is here, but by the time they've come to Notre Dame, roughly 85% of our students have had alcohol, and then roughly 68% of our students have been drunk before they came to Notre Dame. So it's not something that just started here, although it
and these results are consistent across all 1,500 students we've taken.
Yeah, which is remarkable. But the percentages stay about the same. The difference is that the level of drinking increases exponentially once they hit campus. We've seen that in a lot of the qualitative analysis and data the storytelling. This one actually is pretty much the scariest one that I've seen, and this is on a typical Friday night. My college friends usually each drink on average, and you can see right now half of our students say that their friends drink at least 5 or more drinks on a night, and 79% of them are basically qualifying as binge drinkers, but they never thought of it as binge drinking. They're stunned. I don't think there's one student in the first day of class who knows that binge drinking is 4 to 5 or more than that. They think that's normal. At the end of the semester, we give them an exit survey. What has changed? Have things changed? And these, again, are very consistent from semester to semester. And they are kind of heartwarming a bit. Although we cannot stop students from drinking, as you can see, only 2.3% of our students stop as a result of the class. Over 87% of them have changed the way they think about alcohol, its effect on themselves, and effect on others. And over 42% did change their drinking habits. Not by anything that we asked them to do, But we get so many stories about, you know what, I've changed. I don't drink as much, or when I do drink, I drink less often. And then a lot of students say, I plan to change, you know. And then we've even had students who've emailed 2 years out saying, this class, I've changed my views on alcohol, and that's why we keep teaching it. So I'm going to stop my share here.
Hey, Ted, what's the question that got cut off there? The Notre Dame one.
Hold on a second. Let me, I'll go back to my screen here. The Notre Dame one. Show me what they should. Oh, I think that Notre Dame students should take this class. 82%. We have a lot. Yeah, we have a lot of students who think. They think that every Notre Dame student should take this class. They think that the class should replace alcohol EDU, which is a very common kind of pre-college survey that most students have to take, that a lot of them lie on, actually. But our polls are anonymous, so they don't have any risk of that. So.
The problem with making a class like this required is that it changes the way they go about doing it, right? The moment you make it required, you are going to have, I think that's not the way to do it. I think, you know, it's a conversation we've had, but I you know, these kids are at an age where if you make them do it, I think it changes the way they go about doing it.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's our take. That's a Drunk on Film class, and we'd love, you know, if you guys want to find out more about it, on the TED, it's got some information and some links, and we'd be happy that you can email us anytime. So.
Thank you, Ted and Andre. That's just fascinating to go through that presentation. I think we have a little bit of time to just take a couple of quick questions before we go on to our interview with Gabor Maté. We're going to go a little bit long. Anybody want to pop in with, anybody want a couple quick questions before we move on, or should we just move on? You just go ahead and raise your hand if you have one. And if not, then our work is done.
Hi, this is a question for Notre Dame, Ted and Andre. I'm curious if your personal opinions are that the drinking increases on campus because of peers, or is that more like family pressure that to achieve, and just kind of that, like you said, a lot of the students are very high achieving, and they're kind of the go-getters of the groups. Which do you think it is? A combination of all, or nature, nurture, or?
I would say, based on the stories that we have, our students actually document their first week of the semester. They have a journal at, and I don't know if you agree with this, but our impression is that students are taught how to binge drink by their peers. So the juniors and seniors will, you know, bring them into the community by taking them to a party off campus, or, you know, some unofficial hazing type things where they have to drink alcohol as a way of becoming part of the dorm, being part of the community. So I think the majority of that is part of it. Andre, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think you're right. You need to understand, and this blew, I think, me away, and maybe Ted. Drinking is competitive here. They're competitive, and these kids, they wanted, you know, they think people with the highest, they respect tolerance. If you've got a high tolerance, you're it. And so they compete. And again, it's that keeping up, right? I'm going to keep up with my friends. I can't be the one falling behind. So I do think, look, we do have students who come in and talk about family histories. That clearly is a function. But I think the driver here is being socialized into this world. And then we don't have fraternities or sororities, but we've got residences, dorms. They have their own unique cultures. And I think that fosters and encourages and nurtures the increase.
And, you know, this is what kills me, to be honest with you. You have all of these students that we see these stories who have families who have addiction problems, right? Myself included. And then these students come here, and the way that they're taught to have to be part of the community is to binge drink. In other words, we are leading them, and I say we, I'm not talking about Notre Dame, I'm just talking about higher education in general, because this is across the board. We are leading them down a path of addiction by saying, you know what, you have to be, you know, to have friends, you have to drink at a level. And the other students aren't aware of that. They are aware by the end of the class. They're like, I never really thought about that. I never really thought that, like, pushing shots on my friends is not necessarily a good thing. And it's, you know, it's I wish that there was more education at that level. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's let me share our interview with Gabor Maté. It's in two parts. I'm going to show the first part. It's a 22-minute video, so you can plan accordingly. And if you have to drop off for any reason, no worries. But he has some as you know, I mean, Gabor Maté is a fascinating person and a great public intellectual from Canada, best-selling author, and he talks about trauma as something that informs people's decisions to drink or use. And then in a later part of the video after that, we bring in sort of like how films and he discusses free will and decision-making, and we sort of wrap up the whole thing together. So I'm going to go ahead and share that right now.
We're going to talk for about 15 minutes about the wisdom of trauma.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you my famous question that I always ask you, which is, how can we get to the children before they are adults? I just rewatched the film, and I mean, what we know and what you've certainly taught me through the years is that everything starts in childhood.
Yeah.
And what can we do for these kids? A friend of mine is the daughter of Desmond Tutu, and she and I were talking a couple weeks ago and about her dad's quote, which was, "We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in." And so I asked her, "Could I extend your father's quote and add a response, not just to find out, but do something about it?"
Yeah.
And so that made me, it's like, okay, we know why they're falling in. You've taught us why they're falling in. What are we going to do about it?
All right. Self-servingly, I'll mention my most recent book, which is The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in Toxic Culture, where I talk a lot about child development. And essentially, it needs to begin by taking care of the pregnant mother, because already stresses on the mom in the womb, stresses on the mom will affect the baby in the womb already. So the more stressed women are during pregnancy, the more they're likely their kids to have behavior, learning problems, and mental health issues. And that's not even controversial, And so usually when doctors are trained to look after pregnant women, it's on the physical side, blood tests and nutrition, perhaps, if even that is often ignored, but the physical, weight gain and all that. But nobody asked the woman, how you're feeling emotionally. So really, it needs to begin at least at the first prenatal visit. Okay.
Wow.
Number one. Number two, how we give birth is a problem, because here in British Columbia, where I live, it's not atypical, but the cesarean section rate is almost 40% now. And C-sections are necessary and life-saving about 10 to 15% of the time. But the rest of the time, it represents medical organ interference and medicalization of a natural process and an alienation of women from their own bodies. Now, the birth process was designed by nature not just to get the baby out of the womb, but also to promote the bonding chemicals to be released in both bodies. That'll help them then form an attachment relationship, and then as the birth process. In the Myth of Normal, I talk about all this stuff. Then there is breastfeeding. The breastfeeding isn't just a nutritional dynamic. The human infant is about 9 months behind other mammals in terms of physiological maturation at birth. And there's a good reason for that, because we got the largest heads, so we can't stay there long enough. So essentially, we're born, but still the need for that connection with the mother's body. And the British anthropologist Ashley Montagu called that exterogestation, gestation outside the womb.
Mm-hmm.
And that involves being held close to the mother's body or other nurturing people's body, and breastfeeding is a natural part of that. Now, that's minority of women breastfeed even a few months.
Absolutely.
Not only that, Jen, where are you located?
I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia, in the United States.
Okay. Well, in the U.S., 25% of women have to go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth, which is an abandonment of the infant, because the infant needs that mother. And this, of course, falls disproportionately on people of color and people with lesser income, obviously. The mother needs to read the baby for, well, if you look at indigenous societies and societies not yet civilized, if I can put it that way, kids are with their parents all the time, and so I'm talking about really early days, and that separate, and then there's the stress on parents, so that parents love their kids, but if they're stressed, traumatized, under economic, social, racial pressure, that stress gets translated to the child. And we know, for example, that the more stressed the parents are, the higher the stress hormone level of the kid, or the more, and the more stressed the parents are, more likely the kid is to have asthma, for example, or eczema, so that when you ask, where do we begin? We begin right at the beginning,
Sure.
And then there is families at risk, because single moms or single parents, parents where there's multi-generational trauma. So it's been shown that nursing visits, for example, to families at risk prevent problems in the child later on. So talking about upstream, in the early years, trained nurses just visiting the home and providing parenting support, and so that's the next thing. Then there is how we parent, and a lot of the parenting advice that is doled out in North America is all about behaviors rather than their relationship, whereas the most important influence on the child's brain development is the quality of the child's relationship, emotional relationship with the nurturing adult. So when parents are told to use timeouts and not to pick up their babies when they're crying, they're actually being invited to traumatize their children. And because the child needs that contact. If I say to the kid, you can't be around me if you displease me, I'm saying to the child that your behavior is more important to me than you are.
Yeah.
It's a terrible message.
Well, we also work with the moms who use substances, and that's even more extreme. I mean, they can't wait to take those babies away from their moms, and
which is terrible. The only reason a baby should be taken away is if that mom is abusing the child or somehow putting them at risk. But the fact that mother's using by itself is no reason to remove their child, because that child still wants that bond. Now that mother needs support.
Sure, of course.
So the question is, how can we support her in being the best mother she can be, and not blame her for the use? Her use is just a way to deal with her own trauma, and we're way too quick to intervene and take kids away from there, which itself is have you read a book called The Invisible Child?
No, but I will take note of it and make sure I get it.
Please look. It's a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Wow.
Last year. It's about a Black family in the projects in New York whose family is broken up by the welfare system, and it's devastating on the family. It's a wonderful book.
Okay. No, I definitely will, because it's a growing interest in a growing population that we've really started to work with, and just not. I mean, again, having been a part of the CI community and doing some of that work, and it's like, okay, please, let's stop waiting. And then when I was watching the film, they had the one young lady who I guess had lost custody of 4 of her kids, but then decided, I want to be a mom. And that's what we hear from these women. They don't say, oh, I want to be in recovery. They say, I want to be a mom.
Exactly. And very often when you take away their kids, they start using more drugs to deal with the pain.
Yeah, no, that's definitely real.
So it's totally backward, So these people need more support, not more punishment, not more control, but more support,
Mm-hmm.
If you
I think we'll use your book as well for do a book study or something, because that they're always looking for additional information, and to learn that 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 there's not somehow a defect or something like that within them.
No, absolutely not. It's not. It's just a way of dealing with pain, and pain. You know how much of that there is, and then there's the school system. Which, here's the thing: the human brain develops. I'm quoting from an article from Harvard University. The brain develops through an ongoing process that begins before birth and continues until adulthood, and sets the template for all the behavior, learning, and health that follow. Now, that means that the human brain is developing till adulthood. That means that the major job of the schools is not to teach kids about the Battle of Valley Forge, or Waterloo, or the major job of the schools is to promote brain development. And the kids who are safe and not shut down emotionally, they'll want to learn about the Valley Forge, and they want to learn about mathematics and so on. So the curiosity is intrinsic to the child. Something shuts it down. What shuts it down is trauma, and what shuts it down is lack of proper relationship with the adults. So the major job of the school should be to invigorate and support the child's innate curiosity. And that means we have to build a relationship with these kids where they feel safe and comfortable with us. And the behaviors that our kids are exhibiting that are troublesome to us are actually signs of kids seeking help and acting out their trauma. We end up punishing them for it. We're trying to control it, rather than, that phrase, acting out?
Yes.
So we use it to mean that kids are behaving badly. But if you actually think of the word acting out, maybe you've heard me say this before. Acting out actually means portraying in behavior something you don't have the language for. So in a game of charades where you're not permitted to speak, you have to act out, and kids are acting out. So when the kids are acting out, our job is to understand what is the message, not to control the behavior, because if you get the message, the behavior will change. So behavior is only symptoms. And schools don't get that.
Well, and they need to. And it's interesting. I'll bring Ted in real quick to the conversation. We're working with Ted at recovery movie meetups, and have been able to secure the workbook, and we've started a couple groups, and it's going really well so far. So we were talking about a new project that he's working on with recovery high schools and with children and youth, and using film as a way to build that relationship and then create some of that trust.
Hi, Ted. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you, Gabor. Yeah, I think that, we've spent a lot of time, and, recovery movie meetups is in a bunch of treatment facilities. And I do like to help people already in the throes of addiction. But I think getting to people early and having honest, open, stigma-free, non-judgmental conversations about, real risks and better decision-making is good. And so we just launched a new book called The Teen and Young Adult Movie Guide to Successful Sobriety. Kids can actually watch movies like The Wisdom of Trauma, but also Hollywood films that recovery in a positive, and so that they can have positive conversations about, what it looks like, what it could look like for them if they don't make better decisions, but without scaring them. Just showing them what it is, instead of like showing them somebody in a gutter, showing them how successful recovery can look, if they do have that problem.
Yeah. And that's great. And the way you get through to them is making sure that your relationship with them is a trustful one, so they'll want to listen to you.
Yeah.
Because you give them all the information, but if there's no trust in the source, they're not going to take it in. And so I'm always saying that these prevention programs where kids are told that drugs are bad for them, they don't work, because the kids that listen, they don't need the information so much, and the kids that need the information, they don't listen. because they don't trust the adults. You know.
Some of them are using already, and it is working at that period of time, is what we find as well.
Yeah, yeah. So that's great. Anyway, so when you say how to get to the kids, it's all that stuff. But
So how can we specifically, using that film, I mean, Ted has a pretty big audience. We've got a pretty big audience, but, I think they're starting to hear the message of trauma, and many think they know what they're doing and they don't.
Yeah.
Just really being able to leverage that, and because we've got to do something different.
Just getting the message through that trauma exists, and that it has huge impacts and lifelong impacts on physical and mental health, and that it can be prevented, and that it's not about people being bad or morally deficient or stupid or making bad decisions. It's really about people being traumatized, and that through that lens you can understand so much about human behavior. That if you can do that, that's big.
Well, I think the other piece that I'm finding is, and you've talked about this as well, is getting people to really care about humanity. I'm finding that that's where a lot of the breach is also, is that.
Well, you know what? There's a quote by James Baldwin where he said that the indifference and the death of the heart in American society. It's on my cell phone. I just don't have the cell phone here with me.
I'm terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart.
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah. You know that one?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big James Baldwin fan.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a real problem in American society because, we can see it right now. I mean, if you look at world events and the horrors that are going on, and the world just watching.
Yeah.
Thousands of kids are being killed, and the world's watching. And you get a lot more people engaged in the discussion about what are the chances of the Kansas City Chiefs in their next football game than about what's happening in the world. I mean, well, what is that? And that itself is a trauma response.
True. Yeah. Well, I think the word that you used, I guess maybe that Baldwin used as well, around apathy.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like it is. It's just a flat out apathy.
Yeah.
Also, Gabor, what do you think of the statement that we all sort of willingly delude ourselves with fancy ideas and very easy concepts to sort of distract ourselves from just the day-to-day reality of reality?
You're absolutely right. And let me quote James Baldwin again. It's here. It's in the last chapter of Myth of Normal, and he says, "We live in a country." It's almost what you just said, Ted. He says, "We live in a country in which words are used mostly to cover the sleeper, not to wake him up."
Yeah.
And actually, in that chapter, I talk about the necessity to be disillusioned, and people have so many illusions. They delude themselves, as you say, and people say, "Oh, I got disillusioned." And I'm saying to them, would you rather be illusioned or disillusioned? What would you rather have? And we do delude ourselves because the reality is so painful.
Yeah. Well, that's where some of that numbing comes too. Is
that's exactly where it comes from. Yeah.
Yeah. The reality is awful for people to deal with, and so they can't.
Yeah, and genuinely, it's awful. For a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else I can tell you guys?
No. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey.
I really appreciate it, and am confident that certainly it makes a difference in the work that I do. So, it's being able to pass it on further. I appreciate.
Thank you both so much. All right. No? Okay.
Just a quick question. What have you read Sapolsky's book, Determined?
Yes. I haven't read the book. I've read about it. And I even have a quote from his book on my cell phone, of course. He says basically there's hardly any such thing as free will because we're so determined by our biology, what happens to us, and so on. It's true about 99% of the time, and so he also says that therefore blaming people or punishing them makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that. I'd love to talk to him about it because I think it is possible to get that freedom, but it takes a lot of work, a lot of awareness, so that people who go through recovery, for example, post-addiction, are less determined, much less determined in his sense than people than before. So that means it is possible to get some agency, to get some freedom, but it takes work. In this life, it takes work.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, you have to go through hell and back to get there.
We're all aggressively boxed in by prenatal situation, genetics, trauma, and then what happens to us, socialization, the school system and everything, and then and socioeconomic background, and then we're just windowed into this short window of like possible outcomes, and then it's our fault that we made the choice that we did.
Yeah. You remember that film, Matt Damon and Robin Williams?
Oh, Good Will Hunting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. I think so, yeah.
Love that.
The iconic, the biggest scene in the film is when the therapist, Williams, looks at Damon and says, "It's not your fault." It's not your fault. It's such a beautiful scene, It's not anyone's fault,
And I had the privilege of speaking to one of the writers of that line.
Oh, yeah?
Ben Affleck.
Oh, Ben Affleck wrote that. Of course he did, yeah.
Yeah, and who has a history of mental illness and his family and genetics and everything. And we talked about how he also felt like he's, was funneled into a series of decisions and that he has very little choice or agency in it. And that he just, like you said, he has to work every day to avoid, that impulse of self-destruction. And, but it's not his fault. And so when he realized that it wasn't his fault, he's giving himself not a free pass, but he's, being easier on himself, and it makes his life a lot easier.
Yeah, that blame and shame, I think, would start going away some, and then he can live, and we can live authentically into who we are.
Yeah, now that you're re-traumatizing yourself all the time through a twisted definition of who you think you are based on the choices that you've made that you had no agency on.
But they weren't choices. Choice involves freedom.
Right. They weren't really choices.
Choice involves freedom. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. We won't take any more of your time.
My pleasure. Great to meet you both. Take care.
Thank you to Dr. Maté for that. And his new book, The Myth of Normal, is tremendous. And many of you have probably read Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And also the Wisdom of Trauma documentary film that follows up on a lot of the ideas that he was expressing. Any questions before we went a little bit long? I'm sorry about that. 2 hours. Wow. I think in 7 minutes, Zoom is probably going to cut us off. I don't know, depending on my account. But anybody have any closing thoughts or questions? And before we adjourn? No? Okay, well then, listen, I'd love to thank Jan Brown from Spirit Works Foundation for joining us, and Ted Mandel, an honorary venter of the University of Notre Dame. And for all of you who joined from the UK, Jenny and Nella Jo and Ted Mandel and Stacy Peterson from Canada, wow, and Lisa Hamill and the Kennys, thank you so much for joining us. And Dana, of course, everybody, and Perry, who stuck it out. Thank you so much, Perry. By the way, Perry is a filmmaker as well, has a lot of really great content available, and I'll forward everybody his email if you want, Perry. I can put you in contact with people in this group. So with that said, thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon and a great weekend. Enjoy the Super Bowl with your non-alcoholic beverage of choice, or if you are a successful moderate drinker, good for you. All right, I had to leave early, but with that said, thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend. Cheers.